So hi, today's date is December 1st, 2019. And so do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Grama.
You have to say your name.
I'm Alice Ann Friedrich, and I'm Juliana's grandmother.
That's right. And how old are you?
Oh Lord, I will very soon be 81.
Good. Awesome. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things that happened in the 1900s, and we're just going to have a conversation about what you remember and your experiences during this period in time. What about the atomic bomb? So these were dropped in 1945. Do you remember hearing of the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, what I remember about that, because let's see, how old would I have been? I would have
About
been
7.
about 7 or 8, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I remember is when we would have bomb drills at both school and at home, and the whole town there would be a siren that would go off, and then everybody had to go to their basement, cover up their windows so that no lights could be seen by any incoming aircraft. And my younger brother and sister and I would go sit on the basement steps and just kind of huddle there together until the drill was over. And the purpose of this was so that when the Japanese airplanes would come in, if that ever happened, they wouldn't be able to tell a town where a town was if there were no lights below. And so that was the reason we had to practice those drills, and you never knew when it was a practice or the real thing. And we were just young enough that we had, we're scared to death, scared of that. And that's what I remember. I don't know that my sister or my brother would have any memory of that, which is interesting because my sister was 2 years younger than I, and my brother 6 years younger than I. So I bet they wouldn't have any memory of that. But that was scary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
To me, that was really frightening.
Did you do that with your mom at home?
I struggled to think about where was my mom, where was my dad, and I can't picture them. So I don't know if I had the sense that they were not on the stairway with us.
Mm-hmm.
But why would they not have been? I mean, they would have been, but I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
You just remember it being scary, as you're the older sibling too, right? You were the oldest.
Right. So that's why, and I was just at that age where and we talked about it in school because we had to practice getting underneath our desks in case there was any attack. And we didn't have any idea what that meant even.
Yeah. So did they teach you about what was going on in politics during that time, or did they just say, we need to practice?
Well, we were all smart enough to say, why? Why are we doing this? But I don't remember them telling us why, but there was a general aura that we were at home and at school and in the community that we were at war. But we were too young to know what war meant,
Mm-hmm.
Unless you had a parent or a family member that was in the military, and then you knew a lot more. Your context was very different then. But I didn't have that, so we just did what we were told.
Wow.
Without really knowing exactly why, but just being scared.
Jeez, I can't, and that kind of reminds me of how a lot of students must feel today, although they might be a little bit more aware because of the culture of today's generation, but with the mass shootings and all of the drills that people have to go through now.
Yes. And I can't help but feel when I see those pictures on TV, that takes me back to what my memory bank still holds.
Mm-hmm.
About what we had to do as little kids. And what these youngsters are doing, and oldsters now, and it's like, so I can have some inkling of appreciation how they must feel.
Right.
It's awful.
Do you remember how often you did the drills?
That's an interesting question. We certainly did it often enough that it's a memory that's not going to go away.
Right.
But I am guessing once a week.
Oh wow.
We probably had to do that.
And do you know how long that lasted? Do you remember a time being like, oh well, now we're not scared of the bombs anymore? Or do you just remember kind of fading out?
I think it was probably more fading out. But I don't remember when we were authorized to not have to do that anymore. But we did it for what seemed to me as a young child, we were doing it all the time.
I know. Okay, let's go on to something brighter, JFK's assassination. Not a lot of happy things. So this happened in 1963. So this is, you'd be much older. You'd already had 3 of your kids probably at this point, right? 3 of the 4.
Right.
So, do you remember where you were when you found out that he was assassinated?
I remember exactly where I was and where my husband was. We were all together, and a couple that we knew. I don't remember who they were necessarily now, but in our living room, and we watched that television from. It was on every instant. It was. You couldn't take your eyes off of it, and and they kept playing it and playing it. You couldn't get enough of the television coverage of it, and it was just so staggeringly frightening to think of that happening in the middle of our country,
Yeah.
in our world.
When you say they were playing it, were they playing the footage of him being assassinated?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember how you felt? Did you cry? Did you?
Oh gosh, yes. It was an emotional experience for everybody that was there. It's just not something you can wrap your mind around.
Right.
Happening. It was like you didn't want to see what was on TV, but you couldn't take your eyes away from it. And we got like nothing done. I keep thinking, I wonder if the kids got fed. It seems like my whole world felt like it was crashing down.
And you liked Kennedy as a president?
I did, and I remember him coming to Madison when he was running for the presidency. And I remember Granny Ag and Annie L and Aunt Sandy, and they came up from Batavia to see him in some whatever venue. I don't know where that would have been. I mean, he was an extremely popular person, obviously, but yes, it was like we were Democrats from the time we were born, and so this was somewhat of our political heritage that was killed in front of us.
Yeah. Just
in front of us.
It probably almost feels like you lost someone in your family.
It did feel that way. Yeah, it was because my own parents were just as disturbed as we were.
Right.
So there wasn't comfort to be found anywhere. It felt like,
Yeah. Oh, what about so then LBJ took over.
LBJ took over.
And do you remember feeling confident that he would be able to fill his shoes? Now he only had a little bit left of that presidency to fill up, but do you remember feeling confident about that, or were you just so distraught over JFK being assassinated that you couldn't even think of how would we move on from this?
Well, I knew that there was a lot of strife between the Kennedys and Lyndon Johnson and his half of the Democratic Party. So I didn't feel particularly confident in his ability to carry on the country, but Bobby Kennedy was still alive, and that made it okay that Johnson could get stuff done and would do the right thing.
So, since you mentioned Bobby Kennedy, we can kind of jump forward a little bit. So, he also was assassinated.
Right, in June of 1968.
So 5 years later, because Bobby Kennedy was going to be running for president as well. And then he was assassinated, and he was assassinated shortly after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So there were a lot of deaths of
bing, bing,
political...
bing, bing. It was, and those were all of the icons of our time, and the personal history that my family would have is that my brother went to Georgetown for college, and when he was to graduate in June of 1968. But because of Bobby Kennedy's assassination, Georgetown put a hold on the graduation. And so those students, those classes that were graduating in June of 1968 didn't have the big party and the big to-do about their graduation. And President Clinton was in my brother's class at Georgetown. And so that's why when President Clinton was in the White House, once every 4 years, he invited all of his classmates to come to the White House for the party they never had. I think they all felt cheated because they didn't get a big old party when they graduated. So they had a pretty famous person that wanted to have a party. So yeah, that was kind of fun, and I of course looked forward to that greatly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, not that I had anything to do, but that my brother then came to visit and stayed a while.
That's cool. That's a really cool story.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's transition back then. So we'll go back in time. So a lot of things, we were talking about Martin Luther King Jr. for a quick second, but a lot of things were happening in the civil rights movement in the 60s, leading up to JFK's death, and things are still obviously happening today. But prior to the 60s, in 1955, this was the first time that I learned about it in this class, was the murder of Emmett Till. So you grew up in Illinois. You were still in Illinois in 1955, or would you have been in Wisconsin?
No, I was still in high school, because I graduated from high school in 1956. So yeah, we were in Illinois, still in Batavia.
Do you remember hearing about the murder of Emmett Till?
I struggle with thinking about that because I don't remember that. I can't believe that I wouldn't have, but I certainly had heard about it in my life since then, but I don't know that I have any memories of that particular time because I didn't grow up in a city, a little rural town that I don't know that I knew what the word segregated meant even, so it was just like, what are people talking about? What do they mean? Why would you? What? It just drove people crazy because we didn't grow up with people behaving that way toward another human being.
Yeah.
It was just maybe for the first time I really realized Batavia was a really nice town, a good town.
Yeah. Well, and that was really the point behind Emmett Till's mom, making sure that this went on the news and everybody saw it, because it was like, wake up and realize what's going on in our country, because maybe a lot of people in the Midwestern or northern city or towns in some areas, maybe they didn't experience this kind of racism, but she wanted people to know, like, this is still happening, and it's happening to people. Like, her little boy was not from there, and he just went down for the summer, and that horrible, it's horrible. A lot of things happened that wasn't really, it was out of the ordinary, but that type of violence and discrimination towards people because of the color of their skin wasn't in the South. So it makes sense that you wouldn't have necessarily have experienced that type of climate where you lived. But you said you didn't really hear those buzzwords of segregation where you grew up. So did you go to a segregated school growing up? Were there any black people in your school?
There was one black student. She was in my class. I went to a private Catholic school, and not in Batavia, but in Aurora, Aurora was much more. It was a bigger city. Now, it's kind of funny describing it that way because it's not that big a city, but it was a lot bigger than Batavia. And they had racial problems, I'm sure. I just am guessing. I can't remember anything specific, but I am just guessing. But anyway, this young lady she was in my class, and I don't know if she was the only black student. I know she was the only black student in my class, but she may have been the only black student in that 4-year high school.
Well, that's the rise of private schools. The whole reason private schools really came about was to get away from integrating racial integration, because after Brown versus Board of Education, public schools had to desegregate and integrate both races or all races, and so they just started being like, well, we'll just make private schools and we'll set them up because then we don't need to follow that rule. I'm not saying that was maybe the case for your school. I'm just saying that, that's really why they started.
Well, and these were the high school that I went to was a private Catholic school, so it had been in existence for a long time. But how it got started, I just remember Monsignor Donovan was our priest, and it wouldn't have. I mean, he just wanted us to have a Catholic education, whatever that meant, and we didn't have any idea what that meant because we didn't have our grade schools were not, they were not private schools in that sense, and our tuition. Are you ready for this? Our tuition was $5 a year.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I wonder if that was the same tuition that your black colleague had too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Because I know a lot of times they would give, and I don't know about your area, but I know a lot of times through my research they would give white families like vouchers for free education or reduced education at the private institutions, and they either wouldn't send any information at all to black families, or they would have to pay some like crazy amount of money to deter them from actually going there.
Yeah, I never sensed that. Right. But how would I have known that? Would I have been, I don't know, astute enough to pick up stuff like that? I just don't think that kind of thing. I bet everyone in my class would have said the same thing. No, that wasn't. We didn't grow up in that kind of an environment, but that didn't mean that it wasn't going on.
Right.
But we didn't really know much about. We didn't have that. When I think of the students, the young people that live in Chicago, that is their life from the time they are born, dodging bullets. Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard for me even to relate to that. Even at this age, to relate to that.
Well, that's good, because that means you're recognizing the privilege that you had and that we have, growing up and being not even in such a low socioeconomic area, if that's what we're talking about, or just being black or being a person of color and experiencing things like that. You in your time and me now are so privileged in a way that you're just starting to realize, because you're starting to hear more about people's personal experiences. You may not have heard about that when you were younger because maybe there weren't enough black people in your area to even share that with you. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I don't even remember any black people, any black or brown people in Batavia, Illinois. Now, because I went to school in Aurora, Illinois, and not in Batavia, I didn't get to know the town of Batavia from a young adult's perspective. Mm-hmm. So maybe there were brown or black people in Batavia, but I couldn't tell you that there were or there were. I just perceived that there were not, because I didn't see anybody that looked any different from me. And so it was like, oh my gosh, and I know that when it was time for us to go to high school, and Monsignor couldn't build a Catholic school in our little Batavia, that was just out of the question money-wise, then he made sure that he paid for the tuition at the $5 for those of his students, so that they could go to a Catholic school. Now, if they didn't want to go to a Catholic school, or their parents didn't want them to, they would never have told that to Monsignor Donovan, let me tell you. But most everybody that I grew up with went to school with me from kindergarten through high school.
One of the most famous times in relation to the judicial branch of our government was when the Warren Court was, when Earl Warren was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So this was from 1953 to 1969. So he was the Chief Justice for those 16 years in time. And this goes down as being the most progressive Supreme Court in the history of our country. And so various things were passed, including some court cases that I want to hear about your experiences with, such as Loving versus Virginia, and we'll talk about Brown versus Board of Ed and Roe v. Wade. So we'll just pick three of those being like probably the most popular, I would say, that came out of that. So do you remember Loving versus Virginia and anything about it?
Fortunately, the people that have some sense are starting to make movies about some of these things. And so there was a movie.
So you don't remember much about the court case in real time as you do as much of the movie and the press that it's gotten since then.
Right. No, right. Exactly. No, I don't. And I wouldn't have known that. Because I wouldn't recognize a lot of the court cases. I wouldn't have known what I didn't. And maybe it was part of the time in my life where I was a single mom raising 4 kids that I didn't have a lot of time to be spending on doing things. Maybe I would have just rather just watch something no mind on TV.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So then let's skip some of the court cases and let's go down to, we were talking earlier before I started recording about the Stonewall riots and a kind of similar thing that you experienced about not really knowing a lot when it happened but knowing a lot now. Can you talk about that again while we're recording?
Well, that's been just like a recent, like I would say within the last 5 years maybe, or maybe not even that I had even heard of that. Which was like, and why not? Why would I not have ever heard of that? I don't know. I don't know. And once again, some of this stuff you see it on TV, and that's how you learn about it, either through the news, a news broadcast, or they've made news programs, right, out of what went on there, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine that I had really no idea. I had not heard that, but once again, my life was not. It only went to prove to me how small worldwide was my interaction with the world. It was pretty confined, and that's sad.
But you feel really differently now about your knowledge of current events and the news?
Oh, I would say so.
I would say so too. So I know because you're my grandma, but you constantly are watching the news. You know way more than I know about what's going on.
Well, you have other things that are important that you also have to put into your brain. And I don't have some of those kinds of things. So I can make room. I can make room for, for other things, and it's been a joy. It's been fun.
Oh,
and
good.
I mean, people don't consider that fun, but I do.
Well, now you're a very informed citizen, so.
Yeah. Well, see, I just have you so indoctrinated.
Okay, so what about now? Let's go back. Let's talk about so we just talked about the civil rights. That was 1969. So during that time, so that's a point of U.S. history. But also we had the Vietnam War occurring, and that spanned from 1955 all the way up through 1975. It was a very long war. So can you talk about what you remember about American culture during the time of the Vietnam War and how you were at all affected in your personal life?
It was right after I got married that Dick had to go into the Army.
Oh, Papa was in the Army?
Well, he was able to get deferments for, I don't know for what reasons, but I know that he had to go in the summers for 2 weeks. When Uncle Larry, when Larry was born, Uncle Larry, and my first child, he had to go to Fort Leavenworth for basic training, and I'm trying to remember, there was some hassle about that. Either he couldn't be home or they let him come home for 24 hours. I don't remember what it was. But, and I don't remember, he was very much against the war. But I don't know whether they gave some kind of vouchers. You didn't have to go if you were involved in teaching, or I don't know, something maybe, or being a student.
Yeah, they did. They had, for a while, they had kind of not like an allowance or a freebie, but if you were in college for a while, you didn't have to go into the war. But then after all of the protests that students were doing against the war, they actually took that ban off, or that allowance off, and they were like, well, now you can go and serve.
Uncle Larry, for instance, my firstborn, he had to get signed up through the selective service. You had to sign up for the military. It was a law. I mean, you didn't have a choice. You had to sign up to go to war.
But only if you were a guy?
Only if you were a guy. And he never had to, because if he graduated, if he was born in 1960,
yeah, he would have only been 15 when it ended.
When it ended, he had to sign up for the selective service, because the selective service, what that kind of meant was that every year, if the Army needs 1,000 more people in the Army, they would randomly just draw numbers, and if they drew your number, you had to go to war. Mm-hmm. And he had to sign up for the draft, but now it's not a mandatory thing.
Right. But his number was never called. Uncle Larry was never... His number was never
called. And I don't remember about Papa. I don't remember if his number was... I think maybe his number was called. I don't know.
Maybe his number was called, and then since he was he a professor at the time, or he was still probably a student?
I think that he was... I think he was still going to school. He might have been in his last year of his, master's degree or something. It was around that time. I don't remember.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
The specifics of that. I just remember thinking it was really sad that for your first child, your husband is in the has to go for 2 weeks, whether you just had a brand new baby or whatever. That was your problem.
Wow.
But I don't know when they ended that. That bugged me. But anyway, bugged a lot.
I'm sure a lot of people were bugged about it. So, sounds like you do you remember supporting the Vietnam War, or?
No, I did not support it. I know that I didn't know an awful lot about it, but what I did know was filtered through Papa, because he was teaching. He had just started teaching right around that time. As soon as he could, started teaching at Stout State University in Wisconsin. and in his classes were a lot of Vietnam vets, a lot of vets, young men that were very anti-war. And so he learned a lot about what it was like to be fighting a war like that from them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he is adamant about. I don't think his views on wars have changed since that time. I mean, he really kind of joined their ranks in terms of hatred for war and the people that engage in it, and they're sending good young men that don't know why they're being sent. I mean, they haven't formed any massive ideologies why they have to go and fight a war that maybe they don't at all believe in. And a lot of them didn't even know what Vietnam, where's that? I mean, so, and I just prayed that Uncle Larry wasn't going to ever have to go to war.
Yeah, and luckily he wasn't drafted, because it was a very deadly war.
Yes.
And his chances of having come out of that alive were probably very slim.
Yeah, and I think that's why I had only one boy and 3 girls.
Oh yeah, that's how you picked them. But also in the middle of the span of the Vietnam War, because that was happening for 20 years, so 55 to 75, in the middle of that, and we had talked about it a little bit already, was this huge civil rights movement happening within our own country. And we talked about segregation in the educational system and your experience with that. And we talked a little bit about Martin Luther King's assassination. But we haven't talked about the March on Selma and Bloody Sunday, and that happened in 1965 too. So that happened the same year that your last child was born. Do you remember seeing... So why don't you talk a little bit about that? I know you have some personal experience as far as people in your family and in that.
Well, my brother was really anti-war. But he had gone to college out in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown, and was a lot more educated in the ways of. And then he had gone over to Oxford to go to school over in England. And I know that when he came over in 60, see the dates are real fuzzy for when he was doing different things, and he was very much of a peacemaker,
And you said Uncle Bill, your brother,
my brother.
Did he go and march in Selma too in 1965?
Yes. Yeah, right. He went and marched in 1965, and he went down to Selma and marched in that.
Do you remember seeing the clips of that on TV?
I look really hard every time there is one, and I've never seen him.
But you remember seeing the clips of the march in general. You remember seeing that?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. See, but he knew all of those people, all of the people that you read about, like John Lewis and all of the political people that are, yes, they're in toward the end of their life now, but they were the young up and comers and the ones that were fighting the battle, not literally fighting the battle, intellectually fighting the battle, and so he knew all of those people. It was really and he got where he got, whatever that little phrase means, because of all the people that he knew in Washington.
Do you remember seeing how the black people were so mistreated by the police in that march, and why it was called Bloody Sunday and all of it on your TV? Do you remember watching it in real time or thinking like, my brother's there? Or?
I don't remember watching it in real time as much as I remember, like maybe in the last 5 years or 10 years or something like that, where they show scenes like that. And when you see that, you think, is this a movie?
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of stuff didn't happen, and that was real.
Right.
I mean,
I remember having that reaction. I watched the videos for the first time in my history class. This is the first time I've ever seen clips of it, and I was beside myself.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, what? You just can't imagine people behaving that way toward another human being, white or black or brown or purple or green. You just, what? And how do they get that ideology driven into them that they must hate they must hate someone that doesn't look like them? I don't know.
You didn't grow up that way.
No, I didn't. I didn't. But I don't remember having any children in the neighborhood. They were all white. I don't remember it ever being thought of as segregated, or no one said, "Oh, you can't live there," because of blah blah blah. I don't remember anything like that. And I think I was naive thinking that didn't go on in Little Batavia, but it certainly was something I wasn't aware of. I don't remember any reason or any memory to say, what is going on here,
Mm-hmm.
And I know that my mother, and it was mainly my mother, because my father was a traveling salesman, one of those typical, that was a job they had, and so he was gone like Monday morning until Friday night. So my mother basically was the one who raised us and on a daily basis. And they were good people. I don't ever remember them ever speaking in that manner or wanting us to think that way. And it's could it be that Batavia was not segregated, or was not, was really, but that was like in the 1950s. And so makes you wonder what reality really was back then. And I don't know. Because when my friends and I that are still, we still see each other, they have the same memories that I do. They don't say, "Oh, what are you talking about?"
Well, but all your friends are white.
But all my friends are white.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting, kind of really analyzing your own memories and your own perceptions and how your privilege maybe shaped what you saw, but at the same time, even though mainly all of the people you interacted with were white, you still grew up being open-minded, and you never treated anybody differently because of how they looked. Even now, in this day and age, a lot of people talk about how their grandparents are so racist and it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate because I don't have that experience. Like, you were raised by somebody that was open-minded, and you raised all your children to be that way, and my mom raised me that way. And so I feel very lucky that I don't have that experience, because I know I can have these discussions with you about really looking back at our white privilege and analyzing how that may have affected your own memories. And I know that I wasn't worried about having this interview and you saying anything racist, because I know that you're not a racist person. So it's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I've always been grateful for, having to do with race, was when Dick and I got married in 1959, and we moved right away. We moved up here up to Madison, Wisconsin, because Dick was starting his master's program. And we moved into Eagle Heights, and that would mean something to anybody that had gone to school in Madison, but Eagle Heights was the campus housing for married students.
Oh.
And it has grown and grown and grown and grown. See, but that's where we lived. And whenever we came back, because Dick had to come back in the summers to work on his PhD and stuff, and then we came back for a year he had to spend on campus. I don't know that they have those rules anymore, but of your either master's degree or PhD, you had to have 1 year in residence on campus. So we came back for a whole year, and that's why Ursula was born in Madison. That was the year that we came back, and he had to be in residence, actually living in Eagle Heights. Okay,
So you're living with international students, foreign students.
yeah, they were all, and they were all, and they would all dress in the dress of their country, because they were, now probably they don't, they're a little more Americanized type of thing, but they were here for a couple of years to getting their education. It was only for married University of Wisconsin students, because it was really it was very cheap housing, very nice. I mean, it was nice. We couldn't have afforded much, and so we got to know people from Timbuktu to wherever. We got to know hundreds of different people because they lived in our building. They lived in the building next to us. There were eight families in a building. And it was like a mini United Nations. And so you saw people the way they should be seen. And that hopefully they saw us as not the horrible people from the United States, that they saw us as good people. But, I mean, it wasn't just the kind of Batavia environment. It was a worldwide environment living in Eagle Heights. And that was, and Uncle Larry, our firstborn child, went to school in kindergarten to what was called Shorewood Hills School, which is where all of the students from Eagle Heights went to school. And this Shorewood Hills was like a really fancy place. And here are all these hundreds of ragtag kids, from, all over, invading this invading this village, and the school loved it, So that's why certainly, the kids shaped the way they thought about who their classmates were. They had such a positive feeling about it. I mean, they didn't recognize colors. I mean, they just had contact with so many different cultures that and we didn't really know how lucky we were to be able to give our kids that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that just like your own educational experience and how that shaped your, views on the world, I'm sure that probably had a big part in shaping Uncle Larry's, at least, or anyone else who went through that too.
Yeah. So that was really kind of interesting when you think back about how do your kids get their ideas shaped, and how did, because I don't think that the young parents that we all were had time to really think about what we were doing, except getting food on the table and clothes washed, and it wasn't anymore. It was very basic kind of living.
Well, I think that's probably. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to add about your own experience growing up in the 1900s?
Well, no. None that comes ready to mind.
Well, thank you for doing this. This was really awesome, and I learned a lot that I didn't know, and I'm excited because I get to come see you so soon, and I'm going to ask you so many more questions.
Oh, good.